okay, your political ideas, they have a foundation on ethics, yeah? Ethics, morality. And then I want to ask you, how is morality compatible with limited mind, determined human, as you put it, if I understood you well? Because in limited mind and determined human, I don't see a place for the free will, which is the base of morality in the human world. So what do you think about it?
About free will?
And morality, which is of course the base of politics and social
human moral
ideas.
principles we can study, like the kind of work that I mentioned, John Michael, others, are carrying out the beginnings of experimental work, which sheds light on and may ultimately shed a lot of light on what our innate moral principles are, what Hume was looking for example, and Adam Smith and others. That could shed some light on it. So I don't think it's going to tell you much about freedom of the will. Freedom of the will, I think we're stuck pretty much where Descartes was. We just can't abandon believing it. It's our most immediate, phenomenologically obvious impression, but we can't explain it. And as he said, if there's something which we just know to be true and we don't have any explanation for it, well, too bad for our explanatory possibilities. But I don't see any way of getting around that. I mean, there's a lot of arguments that we don't have freedom of the will. And those arguments there's a ton of literature on that. And the literature is kind of interesting, actually for reasons that William James discussed. He said, if you believe that there's no freedom of the will, why bother presenting an argument? You're forced to do it. The person you're talking to can't be convinced because there's no such thing as reasons. So why not watch a baseball game? That wasn't his example. But anybody who denies freedom of the will actually believes that it's there. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother presenting reasons. I mean, unless they say, look, I'm just forced to present these. I can't do anything else but present these reasons. Which is, yeah. And it's very, very odd, these discussions, many of them. Actually, you may have seen some experimental work which caused a big flurry a couple of years ago. Some neurophysiologists discovered that if a person's going to carry an act of willed action, let's say, pick this up, say, you can find activity in the motor centers of the brain before there's a decision to pick it up, okay? And that was held to show, okay, we've undermined freedom of the will. It doesn't say anything. All it says is what we ought to know anyway. Decisions are mostly made unconsciously. By the time they reach the level of consciousness, they've probably already been made. But that doesn't tell anything about how decisions are made.
But you didn't answer me, at least I didn't realize, I didn't perceive that I got an answer. Is it compatible, your teaching about determined humans and ethics, political ethics, morality and free will? That is what I ask. Is it compatible?
It's compatible.
Do you think it's incompatible and unexplainable? You said it's unexplainable.
I don't understand why belief in certain ethical principles should be inconsistent with the belief that we have an ability to make choices. In fact, they seem totally consistent. Now, maybe it's all wrong, but they're consistent.
If somebody's determined, one cannot take a choice. That's the base of.
Yeah, I don't understand what the alleged inconsistency is. In fact, I think it's more like what I thought you said before, that the commitment to moral principles basically presupposes freedom of the will. But I don't see any inconsistency.
She attributed some belief in genetic determinism to you, but you haven't committed to anything like
that. There's genetic determinism, of course. That's why we're all humans and not insects, because that's our genetic endowment. That's genetic determinism. Just what follows from it, you have to look and see. We don't know.
My question relates to the previous question, actually. Free will. You know, as a philosopher, I'd like to, well, you as a philosopher, I'd like to ask you this question. You know, studies have shown that decisions made in the brain actually appear some moments before an individual experiences them. Yeah. Well, how can you then say that there is such a thing as free will? I mean, thus, wiring, determinism, you know, it proves that free will basically doesn't exist.
Yeah. Those are the experiments I was just referring to. There are some experiments which show that in a willed action, simple willed motor action, you know, picking something up, there is activity in the relevant parts of the motor cortex before the decision to pick it up is conscious. Okay? That tells us absolutely nothing about freedom of the will, except that its choices are probably unconscious. But I think we know that without the experiments. What? Complicated? Oh, yeah. Anything in this area is very when we understand nothing, everything's complicated. Yeah. It's another truism.
The primary attribute of supernatural thinking is that there are magical entities or forces which control the fate of humanity. On the contrary, most naturalists argue that humans are actually just one sort of animal, very much a part of the natural world. This then means that our behaviors are determined by some combination of our genetic makeup and the environment from birth to death, and how that environment acts on those genes. Do you think such a naturalism leaves open the possibility of free will, which seems to contradict our notion of cause and effect universe?
No, it doesn't contradict anything. It just says that we don't know whether the phenomenon that we all experience, you know, it's our most immediate experience, the phenomenon of freedom of will is a real aspect of the universe that we simply don't comprehend yet, or maybe ever, or whether it's an illusion that can be explained in some other fashion. That question just remains open. There's plenty of things we don't understand. For example, we don't really have an intuitive grasp of something which now naturalists take for granted, namely that if I move my hand, I'm moving the moon. You know, that there can be interaction at a distance. When Newton proposed that, he regarded it as a total absurdity. That's why which is, he said, no person of sound scientific understanding can imagine to be true for a moment. In fact, he spent the rest of his life trying to find some way to get around it, as did leading scientists of not only of his day, but for centuries afterwards. It finally became scientific common sense. Well, there are things about the world we just can't comprehend. And we don't know how far. If we are just part of the animal world, as I believe, and I think you believe, then our cognitive capacities are going to be like all our other capacities. They'll have a certain scope, and they'll have certain limits. That's the nature of a biological organism.
So you're suggesting that until we know more about the workings of the human mind, or that neuroscience is starting to show us, we can't definitively come down one way or another on the free will question. It's more of a matter of intuition and still in the realm of philosophy?
Bertrand Russell pointed out back in the 1920s, and I think correctly, that there are several grades of confidence that we have, or we should have, in our belief system. The highest confidence is in our immediate experience. Mm-hmm. The second level of confidence, he said, is in the reports of immediate experience by others who are like us. And the third level, lowest level of confidence, would be in the scientific constructions that we develop to try to make some sense out of our experience. Well, our most immediate experience, I can't think of anything more immediate and less questionable, is that I could decide right now to, say, hang up the phone or start talking about, the Boston Red Sox or 1,000 other things. But I'm not going to do it because it wouldn't be appropriate. Our most immediate experience is that we act in ways which are somehow appropriate to situations, which is quite different than saying they're caused by them. Now, maybe there is some way of accounting for our choices in terms of the circumstances in which we're placed and something internal to us. But that's a thesis.
It's certainly counterintuitive, and I think philosophers who discuss, call themselves determinists, like your friend of mine, Ted Hendrick, would argue that it is counterintuitive, and it might be easier to dismiss what they call counter-causal free will than to affirm pure determinism. But it is a very complex question.
I don't even believe that it's a complex question. Mm-hmm. I think it's something that we simply do not know. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of things we don't know. One of them is whether the immediate experience of freedom of will is an illusion, or whether it is in fact an aspect of the universe that we have not yet come to comprehend, and that our cognitive capacities may not allow us to comprehend. Just as our cognitive capacities, if we are serious about it, are like Newton's. They do not allow us to comprehend the fact that action without contact is possible. We accept it, and we understand theories about it, but there's a big difference between intelligibility of theories and intelligibility of the world. In fact, what happened in the Newtonian revolution, took a long time for it to sink in, was that the aspirations of science were lowered. In the early modern scientific revolution, say Galileo up through Newton and beyond, the assumption was, guiding idea was, that the world is a kind of a complicated machine, sort of like a clock, the fancy clocks that artisans built, just a lot more complicated. And we can understand it. And our goal is to try to gain the understanding of how this machine works. Well, when Newton came along, he was accused of reviving occult forces, things that a machine can't have, like action at a distance. And he more or less accepted that. And, he's not a fool, Newton, nor were the other great scientists of the day. And in fact, if you look at what really happened over time, the aspirations were lowered, the goals of science were lowered from intelligibility of the world, which we kind of give up, to intelligibility of theoretical explanations of the world, which we hold and try to pursue.
Well, the reason why I'm asking this question at all, because I think it might be important due to the understanding it might offer us in how we treat one another, especially with regard to, say, the criminal justice system. For instance, if we understand that we're not ultimately responsible for our actions, as determinists say, we might want to alter our rather punitive methodology regarding punishment and reward, and refocus our efforts on creating a healthier environment from the get-go.
I agree with your goal. What you're describing, but I think that's totally independent of what speculations we have about the nature of freedom of the will. We do it anyway. In our ordinary lives and in human affairs, we simply take for granted that people have freedom of will just as we see in ourselves, and that they therefore have moral responsibilities. How we proceed to deal with the questions that arise, that's a matter of the level of humanity and of civilization that we've achieved.
There's big debates about freedom of will. It's kind of striking that everyone who participates in these debates, including the people who write learned tomes showing there's no freedom of will, believe in freedom of will. Otherwise, they wouldn't write the learned tomes. If we're all just thermostats of some complicated kind, then what you do is determined, and how people react is determined. So what's the point of the effort? None. So everyone kind of intuitively believes it. We all believe that I can either pick this up or throw it across the room or not do anything with it. But what is it? Well, it lies beyond. I think you can speculate about what the core of the problem is. If you take a look at human science, there are two concepts that are pretty well understood. One of them is determinacy. Something determines something else. The other one is randomness. Things happen without anything determining them. And that's about it, I think. Those are the basic concepts that we comprehend. And freedom of will just doesn't fit in that set of concepts. Well, it could be that this is just another mystery for humans. We don't have the right concept. Some Martian might be looking at us and thinking how stupid we are. Why do we keep the determinacy and randomness when there's obviously that thing out there that I can't point to because I'm a human? Could be. and many other things that seem imponderable might turn out to be like this. I mean, once we recognize that we're not angels, we are just biological organisms, and as such we must have limits. That's just point of logic. You could not have any capacities at all if you didn't have limits, because the capacities determine the limits. And then a question comes, well, what's beyond the limits?
Hi. The people who don't believe we have free will often make this point. Let's say we turned back time to a specific decision that you made. You couldn't have done otherwise. The universe, your body, your brain, the particles in your brain, were in such a condition that your decision was going to happen. At that very moment you made the decision, all the neurons were in such a way that it had to happen. And this all applies to the time leading up to the decision as well. In other words, you don't have free will. Yourself, the control you feel that you have, is an illusion made up by neurons, synapses etc. that are in such a way that everything that happens in your brain is forced. What is wrong with this argument?
It begs the question. It assumes that all that exists is determinacy and randomness, but that is exactly what is in question. It also adds the really outlandish assumption that we know that neurons are the right place to look. That's seriously questioned, even within current brain science.
Okay, but whatever it is that's causing us to make decisions, wasn't it in such a way that the decision was forced? So forget neurons and synapses, take the building blocks of the universe then, strings or whatever they are, aren't they in such a condition that you couldn't have acted in a different way? Everything is physical, right? So doesn't the argument still stand?
The argument stands if we beg the only serious question, and assume that the actual elements of the universe are restricted to determinacy and randomness. If so, then there is no free will, contrary to what everyone believes, including those who write denying that there is free will, a pointless exercise in interaction between two thermostats, where both action and response are predetermined, or random.